Welcome to Stusays EP6, reviewing Picard EP6. Now, I watched this episode about a week ago, so my memory of it is quite poor. I've also moved house, so it's not been the highest priority to record, hence my delay in putting together this podcast. But I will try to remember the episode. Right, there we go. I was actually quite impressed with this episode in terms of dealing with psychological trauma that Jean-Luc Picard went through when he was part of the Borg. This kind of like followed on from episode 5, where the 7 of 9 and Picard had a heartfelt moment where it's like, what the Borg take from you, you never fully recover, you never fully get back what they take from you. So it was quite nice to actually see him dealing with psychological trauma that comes with being assimilated and then being returned to humanity. However, they didn't do enough of it for my liking. It's kind of like, it's like the man who was, how shall I say, claustrophobic, and he has he goes into an underground cave and he has a few minutes and then he's fine. It didn't seem to affect him throughout his period inside the cube. It only seemed to affect him when he first arrived. And I can see why, from a script point of view, they made it kind of like only himself could go across, but that seems a little bit pedantic in terms of the kind of like, oh, we can't allow any of your pals, even though you're an admiral and you've got Federation permission. Surely you'd have aides, so we would assist you, but only you can come and see. It seems a little bit odd, but only as odd as the Borg using handrails everywhere apart from these relatively narrow bridges across. It doesn't make, I mean, every single episode that had a Borg in it, or Borg ship, always demonstrated they had the common sense to use handrails everywhere. But for this episode of Picard, he has to walk across a chasm and he has to have a little kind of attack just so two Borg can magically appear and save him rather than assimilate him. So we have that little moment. I'm not sure if it would have affected the drama that much if there were guardrails along the bridge and he kind of like, he looked down and you could imagine him kind of like toppling over. That would have made more sense dramatically to me, rather than kind of like, oh, we're a high-tech society and quite frankly we can't afford the extra metal to kind of put in a couple of guardrails to make sure no one falls over during any kind of battle sequence or like Borg walking past each other. So did quite enjoy the fact Picard went down the route of getting analysed the psychological trauma that came with being a Borg, but didn't go deep enough. It's a pretty big well, but they didn't bother to really kind of explore it as much as I'd like. Same with 7 of 9. 7 of 9 is a big well of kind of like interesting content and development. Didn't do enough with her as well. Vaguely recall there being some interpersonal dynamics going on in the ship. The doctor who killed her lover. So I did also like the fact, like I mentioned in the previous episode, I did like the fact that the meat of what's going on is so great that former lover or lovers who kind of love each other kind of thing, the one that knows will actually kill the other without really kind of a lot of compassion. It's more a case of like, well, I have to kill you because the stakes are so high. So it makes me curious, so I really hope it's going to kind of be something more interesting. The kind of like using sex as a kind of way to kind of like fill the void, I suppose, is probably more palatable than what they would truly. I mean, you've already got one druggie on board. You can't have another druggie because again, that's the case. Oh, we can't use it because I've forgotten her name because they all begin with an R, but I haven't seen her for 2 weeks. Okay, the former aide to Admiral Picard, the African American woman, R something. She's a druggie, frowned upon in a previous episode. Picard's like, oh, what are you doing that for? And there's a whole kind of like thing going on with there. It's a Earth is an ideal society, so why the hell are there druggies? But again, that's TNG, that's not Picard, and Picard is kind of pissing a little bit on TNG, and that's what annoys me. It doesn't build as much on it. It kind of just digs under layers and kind of gets a very gritty, and it's like you can cure addiction, but apparently you can't cure that addiction, or that drug's even better than something else. But which reminds me of another TV show. No, just not TV show. Another sci-fi series written by Doc Smith. It's a book written in the kind of early turn of the century, actually last century, 19th century. But the Lensman series, and they have a drug which I can't remember the name of, but the drug effectively is all your wishes come true. It is a drug that's so powerful that if you take it, then you see yourself as a kind of god, the very pinnacle of what you could be, and all of your dreams and your hopes and aspirations are completely made kind of like are real inside this kind of like drug. And it is kind of like, it's the most dangerous drug in the universe because everyone wants it and wants it constantly, and blah 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 blah. Interesting. It's almost kind of like very similar to Harry Potter and the kind of that mirror that reflects your desire. It's kind of a drug, but ultimately I can see that kind of drug being a big issue in any kind of universe, but generally any kind of like cannabis based or cocaine based drug in the Star Trek universes would make little sense. But it adds depth to the character, even though we also discovered in the previous episode that she's got a son that she's kind of abandoned because of a conspiracy theory. So the mum's not as great a mum, but now wants to be more involved because there's going to be a granddaughter. And it's like, I preferred it when she was locked up in the ship. Right. But back to kind of like using sex as a way to kind of like try and pacify. I can see that a romance being built between the captain and the doctor. I don't think she's the right actress. I've seen her now a few times. Well, in terms of episodes of what I've watched, I've seen her, and I don't think she has the right chemistry to be the kind of like smart professor, but also kind of cold-blooded killer, but also kind of like attractive love interest. She just seems a little one-dimensional in a lot of respects, a little bit typecast almost. So I'm not sure they got the right actress for that. If you are the actress listening to this, I do apologise. I'm sure you're doing a good job, but I don't think you quite fit. That might change. We've still got another 4 episodes to go or so, I think, at the moment. There's only 10 this part, but good news is Picard has been renewed for a second series already, so come what may, we're also going to get a second series, and you guys will get a second series of Stusays reviewing Picard. The Romulan stuff. We don't get to see a lot of Romulan kind of interests in the TNG. They're a hidden kind of people, they're a hidden kind of race. I did like the fact that they actually have a culture and a depth of culture which actually has very similar to the Vulcans. The Vulcans have this kind of logic, obviously, but the Romulans are more emotionally guided. They've embraced their emotions a bit more, and the ritual that Daj kind of went through with, well, no, I think Saj, or again, forgotten the names, the living biological android went through with the Romulan agent who's currently shagging her, or it to be more precise. She goes through this kind of like bring the emotions, bring the kind of like the darkest depths of your mind kind of to the forefront, using this kind of pattern on the floor and the kind of steps and different points, and then analysing stuff. It did seem, I did like it because it was more Romulan backstory. It just seemed to be a little bit too niche to kind of fit in. They kind of wrote it, I suppose they did write it for the episode, but they didn't kind of write something and then modify it for Picard. It was like, oh, you need to extract this memory. We have the ritual that only us Romulans can do, and no outsiders have ever seen before, but we can do it with you. And the dream sequence, interesting. I actually found it quite novel, the fact that how it was explored was kind of like go to the window. What do you see at the window of the dream? Oh, I've never been to the window of the dream. Oh, now you have the power to then go to the window of the dream. Now, oddly enough, that was quite a powerful kind of sub-moment for me. I can't quite explain why, but I thought it was quite interesting in the ways that things you wouldn't normally do. You wouldn't bother looking out the window. You would just go there. But it also made a bit of sense when you, later on, when there's a skylight and then you've got what do you see, 2 moons, and there's lots of electrical pattern, because this was all to get. I mean, it's a bit of a leap to get the location of the place that built the androids from the dream, because how many places have skylights? It seemed a bit convoluted to me. The dream sequence, yes, fine, but this is Star Trek. You could have done it in so many other ways, and then Romulans actually have a memory scanner thing that you could just kind of like pull memories straight from. So it was a bit kind of ham-fisted, I think, the kind of dream sequence, and then to kill her, it's like, oh, now we've got the information from you. We can't just beam you into space. I can't just vaporize you with my disruptor pistol that I have, or the security guard outside has. No, I've got to kind of leave you this little puzzle box, which will eventually open and release some very, 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 very slow radiation. Because we all know that radiation travels in dust form and creeps along the room in a kind of like weird gas phase. So a gaseous state. So I thought kind of like she's killed a dozen. Her sister killed a dozen Romulan agents who were fully armed and running at her with kind of all the guns they could get her hands on. And he's like, I'm just gonna leave this really slow acting radiation thingy with you. And I mean, I know you're a super strong android when you get activated, but I'm just gonna go. Probably killing you quickly is probably not the quickest thing to do. And then she kind of bursts out and catches up with Picard and Hugh. Now, I'm going to jump back a little bit. Picard and Hugh, there's a dynamic there. I don't like the fact they've not used original actor, but I'll get over it. The loyalty that Hugh has to Picard, that's the kind of loyalty that supposedly he can't ask Riker or Worf or Geordi to help, because that's the loyalty that Hugh demonstrates that Picard would get. It would command him. It would command so much more. But no, this is my series. I'm not going to have too many other people in that are tangentially linked to me. But then the kind of idea of the Borg, ex-Borg needing a voice, and the view that the Borg are actually victims, I found quite interesting. I quite enjoyed that. I did like the fact this mega enemy of the Star Trek universe, this assimilating machine that destroys entire species, but ultimately they are victims, because every Borg who there is has been assimilated by other Borg, and then they go assimilate other people. But they're not doing it of their free will. They are basically being taken over by the collective. So you don't actually get to see the kind of the initial guys who created the Borg at the very beginning and kind of caused the kind of they're the real villains. This kind of small collective of people who started the Borg to begin with. Whereas all the Borg and the guy who's chasing you through the corridors, he's not doing it because he wants to. He's doing it because he's basically an automaton driven by the collective to assimilate and aspire towards perfection. So I did like the fact that they explored that, but I didn't like it either. Equally, I didn't like it because I prefer the Borg. I prefer the villains of the Star Trek universe to be villains. When the Romulans were about in the early kind of days of Next Generation kind of thing, they were the villains. And now they're kind of like, they're the refugees. They're no longer villains, they're refugees, although there are subsects who are like the villains. And again, this is where I say that Picard severely lacks in having a clear enemy who is the equal opposite of Admiral Picard. Because at the moment, we've got a kind of like a randy Romulan and his bitch sister. It's even the kind of like Vulcan security services would be a kind of more on par villain to deal with Picard on a kind of similar level. And they've mentioned previous villains, like the villain that 7 of 9 kills in the previous episode, and the villain who's taking over kind of like the Romulan refugee space, but they don't explore that really in any sort of any real kind of way. So I think again a waste. It needs a villain. So did like the fact they kind of viewed the Borg as victims. Didn't like that fact because I prefer my Star Trek villains to be pure villains, and that again one of the purities of Next Generation is the fact that the good guys are good throughout. There's no infighting, there's no battle, there's no real doubt. It's kind of like all working towards a common cause. They're the good guys, they're going to triumph, they're going to win. The villains, they're wearing the bad outfits, like the Cardassians have I think Cardassians definitely have like the best villain outfits. They're very kind of snake-like, especially with their kind of scales, but I do like the Cardassian outfits because they do represent this kind of dark, kind of evil people. And even then at the end of Deep Space Nine, spoiler, with the Cardassian people pretty much kind of like destroyed by the Dominion. They are again refugees. Were going to be leaders of the Alpha Quadrant, but eventually became refugees because their own rebellion and siding with the wrong people. So yeah. But I prefer my villains pure. I prefer my heroes pure. And this is what Picard doesn't give you. It doesn't give you pureness. It gives you kind of like it gives you a meal with dirt in it. It can be a good meal, but there's still dirt in it, whereas Next Generation gives you this kind of pure meal, but a pure meal that's almost kind of like beyond reality. It's kind of like the cartoon chicken that the character eats, that's completely kind of one colour meat that's all the way through, rather than kind of being the various parts of the chicken that you're munching through and the rest. The last sequence in terms of the escape of the Borg cube seemed oddly, I wouldn't say lethargic, but definitely seems a bit longer. It's like, oh, we're chasing after you, but we're giving you plenty of time to charge up the Iconian gateway. I mean, what the... This is something that I did kind of catch on IGN accidentally. No, I caught on YouTube accidentally that the episode had an Iconian gateway. I wasn't too sure how they're going to use it. I like the fact that it's only being used as a kind of like last case emergency thing for the Queen. Although generally I don't think the Queen has residences in every Borg cube. It doesn't make sense to me. The Queen has her own master ship, and that ship can interlink with Borg cubes, but there's no general, is there like a backup Queen chamber? So it didn't quite gel with me from the kind of like the previous history of the Borg. And then the Borg have a Iconian gateway device, not as powerful as the Iconians. The Iconian one seems to be quite kind of like long distance. This one's only 40,000 light years, which is kind of like half a distance for Voyager's travelled up in the Delta Quadrant, and you're kind of like, this is a vast tactical weapon system you've got there. Yes, the Borg already have transwarp, but come on, this is pretty meaty spatial kind of like transference. I also did wonder if potentially it was the species in the Delta Quadrant that Voyager encountered that had this kind of technology, this spatial kind of inversion, which they were trying to kind of like bargain for their stories. But I can't remember the name of that species, and they mentioned the name of the species that did get technology from. That might have been a callback. I didn't quite get it. I thought it could be, but I'll have to double check and rewatch. But yeah, now now kind of like Hugh's helped Captain Picard. Picard's now found the other Data's daughter, and they're now kind of like fleeing after these very kind of like slow-assed Romulans who are chasing after them. But you've also left your kind of bodyguard who's like, hey, my sword is so much better than all these disruptor pistols and rifles, and you're like, you kind of know he's probably going to be pretty much alive, but they're kind of leaving it as a kind of cliffhanger, and you're like, why? And I say this why from the fact that, yes, they might want to kind of hide the fact that that room has been found, so they're not chased and kind of captured, but surely it would make more sense just to wipe the navigational system of the spatial transference device rather than kind of like power it down, switch it off, and kind of, but still kind of guard the corridor outside, because I think all the dead bodies will kind of indicate what's going on. Like, wow, is there dead bodies at the end of this corridor with no other reason for being here? Could there be a hidden room? So yeah, it doesn't quite make a lot of sense, that part, but I suppose the goal of it is to get Picard and Data's daughter together to then kind of bond a little bit while others are then chasing after them. And so yeah, so could have done a hell of a lot better in this episode, but some interesting points, some interesting little bits of nuggets of meat, and I kind of think episode 7 is going to be a kind of filler episode to then save the budget for 8, 9, and 10, but we'll see. Now that Picard is going to chat with Data's daughter and she's going to survive a bit longer, we'll hopefully get a bit more meat in terms of what the actual guts are of this plot, in terms of what's going on, and why the Romulan kind of rescue fleet was destroyed, and why is it such a big issue to kind of with synthetic people running around. But yeah, we'll see.